Welcome to memoQ Talks, where we talk to industry leaders about their experiences, lessons learned, and what works best across all areas of localization. Now here's your host.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to memoQ Talks. My name is Mark Schreiner, and I'll be your host for this episode of memoQ Talks. Today, we're going to be talking to Tess Whitty, who is a very successful freelancer and content writer. She's also a consultant to help other freelancers grow their business. And we're going to be talking to Tess about her experience as a freelance translator and also listen to her give some advice and share some tips in terms of how translators can grow their business. But before that, let me welcome Tess. Tess, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. And according to your LinkedIn profile, you're down in Park City, Utah?
Yes, I am.
It's a beautiful part of the country, and you should be getting pretty close to ski season. Have you had any snow yet?
Yep. Last night I woke up to a few inches of snow.
Well, does everything slow down there, or is everybody's used to it and so they're just no big deal?
Everybody's used to it.
That's nice, because here in Seattle, we don't get snow that often, and we have a lot of hills around here. And when we do get snow, everything just shuts down. So just whatever your plans are for that day or whatever, just forget about it, because it's the whole city shuts down. But hey, you have an amazing amount of experience, both as a translator, as a content writer, and as an advisor to other translators. You have a blog, you have your own podcast, which is Marketing Tips for Translators, which has over 280 episodes, which is phenomenal. I mean, you must have started when podcasts were just came out. I don't know how you could have done that many. That's so cool. And now you're on the other side. Usually when you do your podcast, you're asking the questions, right?
Yes, exactly.
And and is it easier for you to be in that role, or do you like to be on the guest role?
I haven't been on the guest role that much. I've been maybe featured in 5, 6 other podcasts. So it's still easier to be on the interviewer end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the tables are turned today. So to kick things off, could you just tell us a little bit about, your background and how did you become a freelance translator?
Sure. So yes, I have been an full-time English into Swedish freelance translator for the past 18 years.
Mm-hmm.
But I studied international marketing, and I also studied 6 languages. Translator was not on the radar during my university studies. I'm aging myself here, but yeah.
6 languages, though. I mean, that just
including my native.
I mean, for the average American, including myself, I have trouble just getting my head around English, but, and maybe a second language, but 6 languages is just amazing. Are those mostly European languages, or what languages?
Yeah. So Swedish is my mother tongue.
Mm-hmm.
I was born in Finland, so I studied also Finnish, but I'm Swedish speaking. So that's 2. English, German,
Mm-hmm.
French, and Italian.
That's amazing. And from what I understand, there's Swedish and Finnish are not really the same language group. That's right. So you
Not
can't
at all.
say, hey, well, you learned Spanish, so you can learn Italian. It's not really an apples and to apples comparison, right?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's
in
amazing.
fact,
Mm-hmm.
Finnish is not one of my stronger languages. After English, I think it's French, but that's because I've lived there.
Mm-hmm.
But to come back to my background, I studied international marketing, and I also studied business communication and PR. And it wasn't until we moved to the United States that I was trying to find something where I could stay at home with
Mm-hmm.
small children.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of, some of my old colleagues recommended that I should look into translation. And so I did. I researched it and created my resume, my website, and signed up for translation platforms. And after the first job, I've never looked back.
So you made that decision And at that point, did you have your first customer lined up, or you said, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and build my website and start to promote myself? You didn't even have a first customer at that point.
No, no.
So were you worried at all? Like, is this going to work? Am I going to get the business? Or did you just say, no, it's going to happen?
Uh, I was not worried. I mean, I was like, I'm going to give this a serious try. And it wasn't, like I said, after the first job, I was like, yes, I love this. I'm going to continue.
That's great. And then, how did you, how did you grow it from there?
So I think I've benefited a lot from my business and marketing background. I also worked
Hmm.
with international marketing for a telecommunications and IT company before we moved from Sweden.
Hmm.
Uh, so yeah, I just how did I grow it? I just used my marketing skills as much as possible to grow my business. I became a member of it. American Translators Association, the Swedish Association for Professional Translators, and um, in the beginning, I signed up for translator portals, and I sent
Like,
emails to agencies and stuff, and slowly grew my business that way. And it went
mhm.
really well. So after about 6 years, I realized that I had that as a skill, and I wanted to share the marketing skills with other translators. And I started slowly by presenting at conferences and giving speeches and mentoring, and slowly built it to. I listened to a lot of podcasts early on,
Mhm.
and there weren't many podcasts in the translation industry then. And I know that I like to learn by listening while I do other things. So I decided to start a podcast. I decided to write a book. Um, and then I started to develop some courses. And now I have 3 courses that I regularly teach. So,
That's excellent. And those are, they're online courses, or these are courses that you would teach to a live audience?
the courses are online
Okay.
only. I do give in person, or I did before the pandemic, give a full day or half day in person workshop.
That's excellent. I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. But let me ask you, when somebody is just starting off as a freelance translator, how important is it for them to select a specific niche? For
So,
example, finance or, life sciences, etc.
so when I started, I don't think it was as important as it is now when
Hmm.
you first start out. Because these days you are also competing with machine translation. So it's very important to early on carve out a niche for you, get cultivate an area of expertise. And the narrower you are, the more of an expert you will be seen in that area. So I think it's very important to do that.
Okay. And then what are some niches that you've came across, either, through your own work or you've seen other translators covering, that seem to be successful, or there are opportunities for growth there?
Really. So I have seen many, many different areas of specialization. I have a friend and colleague who specializes in sports, like adventure sports. I have a colleague who specializes in chemical coating. I have a colleague
That's
who,
interesting.
yes,
Chemical coatings. Who would think, right?
I know, not
Yeah.
chemistry, but chemical coating.
Right. Right.
And I know someone who specializes in orthopedics, so not medical, but orthopedics. And I
Hmm.
think that the bigger language you're working in,
Hmm.
the more important it is to really, really narrow down your niche.
So if you're going Spanish, English, for example, you probably better be very focused. But if you're going into maybe such a more, I get, what's the word, less commonly used language, then maybe the niche isn't as important as the language expertise.
Yes, it's still important to cultivate an expertise, but it's not as important to be that narrow, I think.
Yeah. And do you have an expertise right now, a specific niche that you
Yeah. So when
do well
I,
with?
I
Mm,
I started out having sort of two niches. My background was in marketing, so
mhm.
I knew the marketing lingo then. So that was one of my areas of specialization. But I had also worked with telecom and IT and the first sort of internet boom. So
Right.
I knew that lingo too. So I specialized in those two. But it's been during these years as a professional that it has sort of chiseled down to what I enjoy and what I like. And I've sort of married the two of them now. So I translate a lot of um, software as a service and marketing material for software as a service companies.
That totally makes sense. It's interesting because I, from my work in the local industry, I've seen a lot of translator or linguist profiles.
Mhm.
And sometimes I think linguists are very tempted to say they do it all. They'll check all the boxes and
Yeah.
they'll say automotive and machinery and industrial and in marketing and legal.
Hmm.
And for somebody who's vetting a translator, I would right away that would tend to raise a flag. Now,
Yes.
sometimes they can give very specific examples of their work, etc. What advice would you give, for example, if you are a freelance translator and you you know you're afraid to say no to some of the niches, and you actually do have some strengths. How do you narrow it down so that it's credible and clear what area you do specialize in?
You mean how do you pick a niche?
Well, I'm saying like, if you're filling out your profile for an
Hmm.
LSP, and you're tempted to check all the boxes, would you check more or less? What would be your advice?
I would check less because you're less
Check less.
credible uh, if you are seen as a general. You're less credible if you say you specialize in both legal, medical, and finance, for example, because those are
Right.
complete separate industries and areas and languages, basically. So I would pick one of them, and then you can narrow down from there, or two at the most. So choose something to take the first step. First of all, two or three at the most niches, and then start refining. And don't select the niche just for the sake of it. Um, Look at your passions and interests and what you feel like you're good at, what you enjoy researching, and then slowly look at the patterns that emerge because it doesn't come. You can't. Well, I can say you can pick a niche and go. That is
Hmm.
better than not picking a niche at all, because if you pick one and you notice that it's not the right fit for you, at least you have more clarity then. So um, take action, go there. And picking one doesn't mean that you can never work in anything else. You're just um, seen as more of an expert in that particular area.
No, yeah, exactly. And I like how your niche evolved, where they kind of actually came together, where you had IT, software as a service, and then marketing. And it's funny because I've actually been involved in projects, and I'm specifically thinking about Japan right now, where Japanese IT uh, language is very, very different from Japanese IT marketing language. And we've never been able to use, or the projects that I was involved with, we were never able to use the same people who were doing the technical translation and the marketing
Hmm.
translation. And whenever we tried, we failed and then especially if the marketing is coming, say, from overseas, from English, and they're like, "Hey, we want to use this concept,"
Hmm.
and then this whole, it's like they don't say that in Japanese, but
Hmm.
we have to get something that's similar. It's a whole new skill, and you
Hmm.
have translators that are amazing at it, right? And they're almost creative writers versus translators, right? Because
Yes.
it's getting this concept. So I like what you've done, and what you're talking about with freelancers. Try a niche. If it doesn't work, maybe you go to something supplementary or something different, and then and at some point maybe you can marry the two.
And
Um,
there are new niches emerging, I think, too. And mine is still evolving. I've realized the importance for me to know about international search engine optimization and keyword research to really um, create good creative texts in software and on websites and in digital marketing material.
So, for example, when you're translating into Swedish,
Mhm.
you are helping your customer optimize the text for that SEO.
Yeah.
And how do you learn about that? And how do you learn in terms of the words or phrases that are optimal?
Uh, well, there are courses out there and
Hmm.
people teaching that. And I know my colleague Maria Schreibengraf, she has published a book, the SEO Translation Bible, and then I've just studied it. So I've taken a lot of courses from SEMrush, which is the big
Hmm.
search engine or optimization tool. So yeah.
That's awesome. I mean, you're coming at this as a true professional. You're like, okay, I'm translating, but I'm continually developing, learning, and making myself more marketable, but also making, adding to your skill set.
Mhm.
That's awesome.
I also think that's
Let me ask
very
you,
important these days for
I
translators
yeah, to continually be learning, right? Evolving.
because the translation industry is not at all the same now as it was 10 years ago.
Can you give a couple examples?
Uh, the tools are changing. The areas that are highest in demand are changing. Machine translation is becoming better and better. You have to compete with that and sort of find a niche where you can either you can utilize machine translation, but also find a niche that where machine translation isn't good.
That's excellent. Do you have an example of where it's really, really good and where it's not?
So, for example, I don't think I ever have to translate the countries of the world anymore. And
Right.
sort of these more non-creative text, the machine translation is getting better and better. However, if there are non-creative texts that are super niche and specialized, and you really need to know the language, the particular words for it, then machine translation isn't that good yet. But above all, it's the creative stuff, it's the cultural stuff where machines they just don't get the nuances and the cultural. They don't have the cultural knowledge like a human has.
Yeah, no, and again, if you're doing marketing, a lot of that is nuanced.
Mhm.
So, you mentioned tools. How do you decide, and again, this is based upon your experience, but also, advice that you would give to uh, people who are getting started as a freelance translator now. How do you decide which tool to use? Because, every customer in LSP will have their opinion and want you to, hey, I need you to use this tool and that tool. And you could end up spending a lot of money and time learning all the tools. How do you do that? What would your advice be?
I would look at what your clients are asking for, first of all, and to see if it's economically wise to invest and learn in that tool. And if a lot of clients are using that tool and especially if it's compatible with other tools and you think that it's easy to use and you see the economic benefit of learning it, then I would pick one of those tools. For me these days, it has to be easy to use.
Okay. And like t- roughly how many different tools do you use?
I used less and less. Well, no, I shouldn't say less and less. In the beginning, there were different software localization tools.
Hmm.
Um, they were different than the translation or CAT tools,
Hmm.
computer assisted translation tools. So I used a lot then, 5 or 6, but now I use both. I have my own, and then I also use these cloud based tools that are easy to use if the client requires it.
Okay, I was expecting you to say that I only use memoQ and memoQ is the best. No.
memoQ is really good. It contains a lot of the features that other tools you need to add, plug in, so to speak. So,
Well, thank you for that. And then let me just ask you, what tools or what features do you most look for? And I'm not pitching memoQ at this point. I'm just curious, like, what's a must-have feature or function for you?
mm. So I do translate a lot of software
Hmm.
and I do translate a lot of websites. So I want it to easily integrate and work with all the tags and the formatting. I don't want to have to go through several steps in order to make it work for those.
Hmm.
And having an easy way to insert, remove, and move um, code when
Hmm.
needed. And what else? Well, the TM should be good, and well, TM you add yourself, but it should be easy to use and easy to comment and easy to format. Uh,
So ease of use is
yes.
pretty much, yeah, a must-have. Yeah, I mean, you don't want to be struggling. And y- do you well, let me back up. When you first started, how did you decide on your rates?
How I decided on my rate? Well, I looked at my costs and I looked at what I wanted to earn, and then I compared that to the market rate.
Mm-hmm.
And I put myself, I admittedly a bit lower in the beginning just to get experience.
Hmm.
But then I've increasingly, continuously raised my rates. And now I would say that 70% of, for example, 80% of agencies can't afford me anymore. But that's also because I have so much more experience and specialization. So,
So would you say, like, when you're first getting started, you know, take the job, even if you're not, making the top dollar, but you're getting that experience, you're building those relationships, and then as your business grows, you can be a little more selective?
yes and no. I would not go very low either because that
Hmm.
doesn't give a professional impression at all. It seems
Hmm.
like you seem more desperate, and you should be able to earn a decent income from the beginning, I think. On the other hand, you can't price yourself out of the market from the beginning, and it's just a big uphill.
Well, what advice would you give to newer freelancers, in terms of negotiating with their customers, and specifically because it's not just straightforward a word rate. You do have, matches, and how they're going to do fuzzies, etc. How do you? What advice would you give?
Do your research, especially about these cat tool tired rates, and see what's common and what you can accept. I try to avoid them as much as possible. However, if I work with both direct clients and agencies, so if an agency say, "Oh, we don't pay for repetition," then I say that, okay, if I don't have to look at them at all, that's okay.
Hmm.
But sometimes um, it, I would say I'd still glance at them in the beginning to make sure that it's not garbage in, garbage out, so
Right.
to speak.
Okay. And
Um,
then if it was, would you have a conversation with the customer and say, you know what? I can use these, but you probably are not going to be too happy with the final output. So do you then revisit the conversation around pricing?
yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. It's good. Have you done any post editing off of machine translation?
I tried it, I would say at least 5 years ago, and uh, I did not enjoy it then. I'm sure it's much better and easier now. If I've just made because of my experience and expertise, I've made the choice of not doing that.
Hmm.
However, like I said, sometimes I plug in an MT myself because, like I said, I don't need to translate all the names of the countries anymore, depending
Right.
on the projects and the client. But most creative translations can't use empty anyway.
So, what like what advice in terms of just going out and okay, it's day one and you're starting as a freelancer, and you want to go out and promote your business. What are like the three things that you just have to do?
Hmm. Uh, I would say the most important thing is, of course, to hone your translation skills. If
Hmm.
you don't have that many clients in the beginning, volunteer for organization. Take stuff from online and translate it just to get the practice in, and practice, 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 and maybe even find a mentor or an editor in the beginning. Uh, and my two other tips are: work on your mindset, develop your business skills, and how to think like a business, so to speak, and also learn marketing skills.
Okay, some very solid advice. I noticed that you're quite active in a couple of the industry associations, including Women in Loc, and I believe the ATA. How important is that for all translators? And then just bring it back to yourself. Like, what has that meant to you?
Yes, I think it's very important to become a member in a professional association, uh, both as a learning and networking experience. I mean, my first ATA conference paid itself back within a few months, both
That's
in
awesome.
the skills I learned and in new contacts and clients. And but it also gives a professional impression that you are invested in the business, in your business, in your career, that you are abiding by their professional and ethical standards, um, so forth. I think it's very important, and it's one of the first investments you should do.
Okay. And I just mentioned two organizations. Are there any other organizations that you would recommend aside from ATA and Women in Loc?
It depends on what you're working in, if and especially where you are. I would say become a member of the organization in your target language and maybe in your source language. So and where you live. So my first choice was American Translators Association, and then I also became a member of the Swedish Association because I translate into
Right.
Swedish and I need contacts and so forth there. And I also became a member of the Institute of Translation and Interpretation in UK.
Hmm.
Uh, I think because I did get clients from there early on, and that was also a good investment for me because I work out of English. But also because at that time there wasn't a English into Swedish certification exam through ATA.
Hmm.
I was actually the one who was involved in developing that for the ATA.
Oh, that's
But
great.
the ITI had one. It's not a certification, but to become a qualified member, you have to go pass a sort of a certification test. And I
I,
needed sort of proof of my skills and quality.
that that's. I mean, you've been active with a lot of different organizations. I noticed you have two master's degrees. You're taking these SEM courses as well. I mean, it's inspiring that you're in addition to the work you do, and obviously you mentioned that you have children. And so it's like you keep yourself busy. What what are your thoughts in terms of social media?
Mm. I think social media is important, uh, but it's for me it's a two. It's sort of a love hate relationship actually. I think it's important to be on one or two social media where your ideal clients hang out, and
Hmm.
maybe even sometimes, or even just to communicate with colleagues. But I mostly use social media for professional purposes that way, and especially my website and LinkedIn has brought me most of my direct clients because I don't
Okay.
live where my target clients usually live.
Right.
So online marketing is very important to me. Um, and social media is part of the online marketing.
Excellent. So LinkedIn for you is something that you find useful.
Mhm. Yes,
Okay. Great. And do you actively post on LinkedIn
I
or do
try
you use
to.
it?
Yes,
Okay.
I try
And
to
have
log
you
in about 10 minutes every day, and I try to post about once a week, depending, and
okay. And
comment. And
that's when you do a post, is it your content that you're posting or you're sharing something that you saw someplace else? You've seen
it's
someplace else?
both. It's both. I think it's hard to share my own content sometimes, and sometimes somebody else has just expressed it in a better way, and then I just
Hmm.
write about it and share the link. But sometimes I post my own content too. When I, yeah.
Excellent. Let me ask you this. In terms of the lifestyle of a freelance translator, I actually, when I got involved with the local industry, I met some really amazing people that were living the freelance lifestyle. And
Mhm.
one German English translator who focused very much on finance, and he would split 6 months of the year he'd be in Hawaii, and the other 6 months of the year was in Singapore. And I was like, God, man, how cool is that, right?
Mhm.
Meanwhile, I'm stuck in traffic going into the office every day, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
But why don't you tell us the some of the benefits that you've seen or experienced as a freelancer?
Yes, that was what attracted me the most in the beginning because I could be home with my little children. They are now grown up, and I am post pandemic looking forward to being able to work from wherever I want much more than I have been able to while the kids were in school and living at home.
Hmm.
I actually have an apartment being built in Stockholm now, so that's going to be my second base or our second base. My husband still has a regular job, but the benefits uh, are so many that I frequently joke and say I am unemployable these days, meaning not that uh, nobody wants to employ me. It's because I don't want to be an employed anymore. Um, it's uh, our careers are location independent. You decide when you work, how much you work, for who you work, and that creates a lot of freedom, but also responsibility. It's not for everybody. You need to be organized and have some business skills in order to succeed as a freelancer.
Uh, I I think you hit on some of the key things that you have the freedom to go where you want to go when you want to go. Um, are there any downsides?
Yes, of course. As a freelancer, you usually don't know where your next paycheck is going to come from and when and how big it's going to be. Uh, with time, that this becomes more smoother. And there are things you can do to even out the feast and famine cycle. And the more business and marketing skills you have, the easier it gets. But yeah, those are the downsides. And for example, I thought it was really hard to save money in the beginning because I was like, I don't know how much I'm going to get. But
Hmm.
after a while, you find a system to do that too. Set aside money for retirement and so forth. And being a freelancer, especially in the United States, you have to find your own insurance and you have to save for your own retirement and so forth. Luckily, I'm covered by my husband's insurance, so that hasn't been a problem. But those are the
Yeah,
downsides.
health insurance in the U.S. That's a whole nother podcast.
I know,
Oh,
I
it's so
know.
expensive. I've lived overseas off and on for about 20 years, and it's just mind blowing how the the disconnect between what we pay for insurance and then what the quality of the service is. Like, I mean, I've lived in Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong,
Mhm,
Korea, Singapore. And if I want to go see the doctor, I'll just go down to the local clinic and walk in
mhm,
and I can see somebody typically with either immediately or within 20 minutes is a long wait, right?
mhm,
And I might spend out of pocket. I mean, this is even in Japan. I might spend $3 or $4 because they use the national health insurance to
mhm,
cover most of the fees, right? And then the insurance fees for my whole family was less than half. And people say, well, Japan's expensive. Hong
Mhm.
Kong's expensive. Not for insurance.
Mhm. Yeah.
So working independently here, that would be a challenge. And I'm glad you touched on that. I mean, something that people need to be aware of. Um, what about a couple other challenges? Wait a minute, come back. You had mentioned that in the beginning, you have this feast and famine cycle, but there's some things that you can do to, but psychologically, isn't that tough? Because well, I got this job right now and I got another customer asking me to do something and I don't want to say no because I might lose them, right? I'm going to stay up for 48 hours straight drinking coffee and translating because I need to make this money.
Mhm.
How do you deal with that?
Oh, yes, that's hard in the beginning, and I think it's the learning curve that you have to go through yourself, in order to even it out. But with time, you realize that you have some negotiation room with most clients, and even if you turn a job down, there will be others coming up later on. And when you are busy, that's a good time to increase your rates too. But yes, it's a mindset game that you have to sort of get used to.
Okay. And how was it challenging at all sometimes, like when you're trying to focus? Because I mean, translation, you do need to be there and focused,
Mhm,
right? And if you have young children,
mhm.
and they have their needs, and how would you divide your time, or how would you arrange it so that you could focus on either children or on translation or on whatever the other task was?
Mhm.
Because
So
for me, I mean, that would be one of the challenges. I'd be like, I got to work. Just leave me
yeah,
alone.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I was lucky that way that I was slowly building my business up when the kids
Hmm.
were younger. And but I was working when they were in preschool and daycare. I swapped services with other moms. Sometimes I was watching their kids, and she was watching my kids, and you take advantage of nap times and late night
Hmm.
in the beginning.
Sorry, honey, no Netflix tonight. I got to work. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's good. Did you ever miss out on, yeah. Did you ever work for a company? Like in
Yes.
a real
Yes.
9 to 5?
In
Okay.
Sweden.
Yeah. And so in Sweden, okay. One of the one of the nice things about working in an office is that you get to interact with your colleagues, right?
Mhm.
And you get that social kind of contact, but you also can learn from each other. And did you miss that at all?
Yes.
Have
In the beginning, it wasn't so hard because, the kids were home a lot and you socialized with other moms and school bus drop offs and pickups and all the kids' activities, etc. But now that the kids had moved out, I realized that I missed it a lot. And especially after the pandemic, for some reason, I decided to go into a co working office. So that's what I do now. And I meet other freelancers and small company owners, and I love that.
It's interesting you say that because I for the last several years have been working remotely
Hmm.
for in various roles. I actually like going into shared offices, and it's something that, even though I'm not actually working with these people, it allows me to make this mental switch that I'm at work right
Hmm.
now, and it helps me to focus because I'm like right now I'm at home, and it's so easy to get distracted with the kids, family, the refrigerator.
Yeah.
It's
Yes.
like, the kitchen is right there,
Yes.
and it's just so easy. And when I'm in a shared office space or any type of, kind of that business environment, it's just like, oh, okay, my brain just switches and it's easier to focus. But I'm assuming that do you have that same experience?
Yes and no. I have a nice office at home, and sometimes when you really need to do deep focus work, that is easier to do there than,
Mm.
I mean, here in the co working office, maybe because I was so socially starved, I like to hang out in the kitchen and I like to chat with people and and so
Oh, so you might have the opposite effect. You might go there and have less opportunity to focus.
sometimes, yes,
That's
but
interesting.
there
Yeah.
are areas like the one I'm in now where it's called the Deep Focus Room. So that you can.
Deep focus. I need that. Well, hey, you've shared some great information, and I know that we've only just scratched the surface because, I just can't. I mean, I think we're on episode 4 here of memoQ Talks. We just started, and then
Congratulations.
we're doing like a weekly. Thank you. But to have 280, I just that's an amazing amount of content plus your blog. So I really appreciate what you've shared, but I'm encouraging our listeners to visit your websites. And could you just actually share your website URLs and talk a little bit about your podcast for a second?
Yeah. So the URL is marketingtipsfortranslators.com. So
Hmm.
in one word, marketingtipsfortranslators.com. Just Google that and it will take you there, or Google my name, Tess Whitty. That's Whitty.
There's no other Tess Whitties out there.
There is one. Yes, there is
There's-
one.
what does she do?
Something totally unrelated. I've actually
Yeah,
met
because
her because she's my husband's cousin or something.
wow, you're related to the other Tess Whitty. So it's funny, just humorous aside. If you Google my name, Mark Schreiner,
Mhm.
I come up. But for the last 10 years, the guy who comes up right either in front of me or right after me consistently is this guy who does distinctive deck designs. so, so I have this kind of, I would call it white collar profile and in different roles. And he's out there building decks, and he obviously does really well because he comes up all the time, and I cannot shake this guy off
Mhm.
of the search results. But it's kind of funny because I don't think either of our names are that common, but there are people out there.
Yeah, I think the other Tech Sweetie doesn't have as big of an online presence as I do. So,
Yeah.
you wanted me to talk about the podcast. I started it in 2014, so I've been doing it for a
Hmm.
long time. My initial goal was to go to 100 episodes, and then I just kept going. And there's actually a book now that's condensed the best tips from the 100 first episodes, also called Marketing Tips for Translators, available on Amazon, in addition to my Marketing Cookbook for Translators. And it's a cookbook because it's in recipe format. It starts with starters for beginners and goes to main course for everybody and desserts for more advanced. And you can use it as a cookbook. You pick it up and you say, okay, I want to work on my LinkedIn today. And you pick that recipe and it has sort of the ingredients and steps to follow. Um, but the podcast, yes, it's what it is, what the name says. It contains marketing tips for translators and some for interpreters, not as much, but also for interpreters. I have interviewed a lot of experts and colleagues in the
Hmm.
industry. I've had solo episodes. I've also interviewed experts from other areas, like marketing, uh, the marketing industry, etc. So,
That's excellent. And I'm going to buy your cookbook. I think that's
okay.
a great idea for a book, because if I thought about reading a marketing book, it seems so heavy, in terms of the content. But if you break it down into recipe format, and I can skip around and start
Yes.
with the dessert and then come back to the main course,
Yes.
or you know what I'm talking about. I think that's super cool. And I'm gonna get a copy. And then in terms of the podcast, for me, one of the reasons I like talking to people is it's a great opportunity to learn. I mean, I just like talking to people,
Mhm.
period. But
Yep.
when I do a podcast, I learn. I mean, I've learned several things from you. In fact, I've taken some notes here, in different ideas that I'm going to follow up with. So it's really cool. Do you find the same thing?
Yes. I've learned so much during these years too. And a lot of the things I've learned, it's also what I now share with other translators.
Yeah. Well, I find you, obviously you're super experienced and knowledgeable, but also very generous with the knowledge that you share, again, on your podcast, and your blogs, etc. So on
Thank
the
you.
behalf of all the freelancers of the world, thank you.
Well,
And
thank you.
I have one parting question, would be like, what advice to, to people who are just sitting the fence saying, I really want to make this a full-time thing, but I'm afraid to make that commitment. And what advice would you give them? And again, what would that first couple things that they should be doing? What should, in terms of, paving the way for their success?
Uh, I think it's smart to be sort of on if you are doing something else and slowly build your career, but I would just say go for it, try it out, learn as much as you can about the industry, and learn business and marketing skills
That's awesome. And a good
concisely.
way to, and a good way to learn those marketing skills is to get it's the, tell me the name of the title of the book again.
So I have the Marketing Cookbook
The
for
Marketing Cookbook.
translators, and I have the Marketing Tips for Translators, which is
Marketing tip.
also marketing tips, but they are sort of condensed tips from the first 100 episodes.
Awesome. So the Marketing Tips for Translators and the Marketing Cookbook for Translators.
And there's a lot
Did I
of
get
other
that?
resources on the
Yeah.
website too.
Yeah. But I mean, what I like about yours is they're specifically focused on that. I mean, sometimes it's hard for me to take a general concept and apply it to a specific situation, and
Mhm,
because I'm lazy. But you've
mhm.
done all the work for everybody. You've just said here are the the concepts in the specific context of being a freelance translator. So that's awesome. Hey Tess, I really enjoyed talking with you, and I think that you obviously bring a huge amount of value. I would encourage all of our listeners to check out your websites, your podcast, and your blog. Tons of information there, and you also have courses, correct?
Yes, they
Excellent.
are
So
currently actually going to be hosted through pros.com.
you know what? I said that was my parting question, but you just brought up another important topic. How important is prose in terms of, first, let's just focus on the freelance side. As a freelance translator, how important is to be on prose?
I think Pros is where I got my first job. I think it's a great
Mhm.
platform and it's continuously developing. However, I would not have it replace professional association.
Okay. Some good advice. And then I actually, to be honest, wasn't aware that prose was offering courses. So tell me how that works. I'm assuming you're charging for your courses.
Yes, yes,
Okay, and so the platform promotes the courses and then also takes I guess a fee or something.
yes. So I've had them on my own platform for the past years, 4 or 5 years, and this is the new thing that I'm doing. But there are many others who give workshops and courses there too. For example, Corinne McKay and um, others. So yeah,
Excellent. Okay, well, encourage all of our listeners to check that out as well. Tess, again, really enjoyed talking with you, and wish you the best for the remainder of 2021.
thank you, Mark. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for joining memoQ Talks, where we talked with industry leaders about their experiences and lessons learned to gain new insights about what works best across all areas of localization. Join us next time on memoQ Talks.